The Philadelphia experiment. Picture this. It's a crisp October evening in 1943. The Second World War is raging across the globe, and somewhere in the waters of Philadelphia, the most shocking military experiment in human history is about to unfold. What happened next would defy every law of physics we thought we knew, leave dozens of sailors either dead or permanently scarred, and create one of the most controversial conspiracy theories of all time. But here's the thing that'll send chills down your spine. The man who witnessed it all lived with this secret for over 4 decades before finally breaking his silence. And when he did speak, his account was so disturbing, so impossible to believe, that it changed everything we thought we knew about the limits of science and the lengths governments will go to win a war. Are you ready to dive into the rabbit hole of the Philadelphia experiment? Because once you hear this story, you'll never look at official government statements the same way again. Hush, hush, the witness who changed everything. Let me take you back to that fateful night. Carl Allen, a young merchant marine, stood on the deck of the USS Eldridge, roughly 100 meters away from what appeared to be just another naval vessel, the USS Eldridge. A brand new cannon-class destroyer escort sat quietly on the water's surface, surrounded by other military ships in what looked like a routine naval exercise. But Carl Allen was about to witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his natural life. Just minutes before, the Eldridge had been buzzing with activity. Sailors scurrying about on deck, officers barking orders, the usual controlled chaos you'd expect on a warship. Then suddenly, as if someone had flicked a switch, every single crew member disappeared below deck. The ship fell silent, eerily, unnaturally silent. Allen and his shipmates exchanged nervous glances. They'd heard whispers about some sort of test, but nobody knew exactly what they were about to see. The rumor mill had been working overtime for weeks. Some said it was a new type of radar system. Others whispered about revolutionary camouflage technology. But the truth was far more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. As they watched, a low, ominous humming began to emanate from the Eldridge. It wasn't like any sound they'd heard before. It seemed to come from the very core of the ship itself, vibrating through the water and into their bones. The sound grew louder, more intense, until it felt like the air itself was trembling. Then they saw it. At first, it looked like smoke rising from the destroyer. But as they strained their eyes in the gathering dusk, they realized this wasn't smoke at all. It was something far more unsettling. A greenish haze, with no apparent source, began to envelop the entire hull of the Eldridge. The strange fog expanded rapidly, far beyond the ship's superstructure, until it hung in the air like some otherworldly shroud. The haze continued to grow, reaching out across the water until it was barely a meter from the deck of the Eldridge. Carl Allen, overcome with curiosity and perhaps a touch of sailor's bravado, leaned over the deck railings and reached out towards the mysterious green fog. What happened next defied all logic. Instead of his hand passing through what should have been harmless vapor, it was repelled, actually repelled, as if the fog itself was solid or charged with some invisible force. The sensation sent a shock through his entire body, but that was nothing compared to what came next. Without warning, there was a blinding flash of light, so brilliant, so intense, that every man on deck, instinctively threw their hands up to shield their eyes. For several seconds, they were completely blind, seeing nothing but dancing spots of light behind their eyelids. When their vision finally returned, they witnessed something that should have been impossible. The greenish haze remained, hanging there in the water like a ghostly outline. But the USS Eldridge was gone. Completely, utterly vanished. A 1,200-ton destroyer escort had simply disappeared from existence, leaving behind only that eerie green fog. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, the distant cry of seabirds, even the nervous breathing of the sailors around him. But where the Eldridge should have been, there was nothing but empty water and that haunting green mist. Carl Allen and his shipmates stared in stunned silence for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Their minds struggled to process what they'd just witnessed. Ships don't simply vanish. It's not possible. It goes against every law of physics, every principle of reality they'd been taught to believe in. Then, just as suddenly as it had disappeared, there was another brilliant flash of light. When it subsided, there she was. The USS Eldridge had returned to her original position, sitting on the water as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. There was an ominous air about the vessel now, a brooding silence that made her seem like a ghost ship, a specter of her former self. Almost immediately, the water around both ships erupted into activity. Orders were barked across the water. Small launches filled with technicians, scientists, and Navy personnel began racing towards the Eldridge. Carl Allen watched as these men boarded the destroyer with an urgency that suggested they knew exactly what they defined below decks, and what they found would haunt them all for the rest of their lives. Hush, hush. The horror below decks. The investigation team that boarded the USS Eldridge that night was prepared for equipment failures, maybe some confused crew members, perhaps even a few injuries from what was clearly an experimental procedure gone wrong. What they were unprepared for was to descend into what could only be described as a living hell. The experiment had knocked out all electrical power on the vessel, leaving the interior in complete darkness, armed only with torches. The team began their descent into the bowels of the ship, the beams of light cutting through the darkness like ghostly fingers. The first crew members they encountered told them immediately that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Several sailors were found unconscious, completely unresponsive despite every attempt to wake them. Others appeared to be frozen in place, maintaining exactly the same position they'd been in at the moment. The experiment began, like human statues trapped in time. Those who were conscious were in various states of distress. Some were crying out in pain, others mumbling incoherently, trying to form sentences that made no logical sense because their words came out in completely the wrong order. It was as if their minds had been scrambled, their very thoughts rearranged by whatever force they'd been subjected to. But as the investigation team continued deeper into the ship's lower decks, they discovered that some fates were far worse than unconsciousness or confusion. One sailor was found staring in absolute horror at his right arm. The limb had somehow become fused with the steel bulkhead he'd presumably stumbled against during the experiment. Not just pressed against it, not just stuck to it, but actually integrated with it. The cold, hard steel had somehow merged completely with the flesh and bone of his arm, creating a grotesque fusion of human tissue and metal that defied every principle of biology and physics. The man was alive, conscious, and in unimaginable agony. The technicians who found him were horrified to see that there was no clear boundary between where his arm ended and the ship's structure began. They were one and the same, a nightmarish melding of organic and inorganic matter that shouldn't have been possible. Another crew member was discovered with the lower half of his body missing, having somehow sunk into and become fused with the metal flooring. The shock and agony of what had happened to him were clearly etched upon his features, frozen in time at the exact moment he'd lost his life. His upper torso protruded from the deck like some macabre sculpture, a testament to forces beyond human understanding. The deeper into the ship they went, the worse the effects seemed to become. 3 more sailors were found to have been swallowed up or integrated into the ship's hull at various points throughout the vessel. None of them could be revived or saved. They had become part of the ship itself. Their human forms merged with tons of steel in ways that medical science could unexplain and could unintraverse. But perhaps the most horrific discovery was the bloody remains of several men who appeared to have been turned inside out. Their internal organs were now external, their bones jutting out at impossible angles, their flesh twisted into configurations that made experienced military medics physically sick. Only sections of their uniforms and dog tags remained visible from within the grisly mass of flesh and bone they'd been reduced to. As time passed and more crew members began to regain consciousness, the rooms and corridors of the Eldridge began to fill with anguished cries and howls of despair. These men had experienced something beyond human comprehension, and their minds were struggling to cope with the aftermath. The long-term consequences in the days and weeks following the experiment. The surviving crew members of the USS Eldridge were kept under close observation. They'd been sworn to absolute secrecy regarding the details of what had happened, their silence guaranteed through a combination of threats, bribes, and appeals to patriotic duty. But as it became clear in the months that followed, many of these sailors had sustained long-lasting and even permanent anomalous side effects as a result of what they'd been subjected to. Some would descend into sudden episodes of complete madness, acting with uncontrollable rage and violence for brief periods before suddenly returning to normal as if nothing had happened. These episodes were completely unpredictable and seemed to have no trigger that medical professionals could identify. Certain crew members suffered complete mental breakdowns and never recovered, spending the rest of their lives in military psychiatric facilities, mumbling about green lights and disappearing ships to doctors who had been told to dismiss their accounts as combat stress or shell shock. But perhaps the most disturbing side effects were what Carl Allen later referred to as deep freezes. Those affected would suddenly immobilize on the spot, frozen in whatever pose or action they'd been conducting at the time, much like human statues. They remained conscious and aware, but completely unable to move or speak. Incredibly, in some instances, these frozen crew members would begin to fade out of existence entirely, becoming translucent before disappearing altogether and never One sailor who became disoriented during one of these episodes was observed to walk straight through a solid brick wall and was never seen again. But perhaps the most horrific discovery was the bloody remains of several men who appeared to have been turned inside out. Their internal organs were now external, their bones jutting out at impossible angles, their flesh twisted into configurations that made experienced military medics physically sick. Only sections of their uniforms and dog tags remained visible from within the grisly mass of flesh and bone they'd been reduced to. As time passed and more crew members began to regain consciousness, the rooms and corridors of the Eldridge began to fill with anguished cries and howls of despair. These men had experienced something beyond human comprehension, and their minds were struggling to cope with the aftermath. The long-term consequences in the days and weeks following the experiment. The surviving crew members of the USS Eldridge were kept under close observation. They'd been sworn to absolute secrecy regarding the details of what had happened, their silence guaranteed through a combination of threats, bribes, and appeals to patriotic duty. But as it became clear in the months that followed, many of these sailors had sustained long-lasting and even permanent anomalous side effects as a result of what they'd been subjected to. Some would descend into sudden episodes of complete madness, acting with uncontrollable rage and violence for brief periods before suddenly returning to normal as if nothing had happened. These episodes were completely unpredictable and seemed to have no trigger that medical professionals could identify. Certain crew members suffered complete mental breakdowns and never recovered, spending the rest of their lives in military psychiatric facilities, mumbling about green lights and disappearing ships to doctors who had been told to dismiss their accounts as combat stress or shell shock. But perhaps the most disturbing side effects were what Carl Allen later referred to as deep freezes. Those affected would suddenly immobilize on the spot, frozen in whatever pose or action they'd been conducting at the time, much like human statues. They remained conscious and aware, but completely unable to move or speak. Incredibly, in some instances, these frozen crew members would begin to fade out of existence entirely, becoming translucent before disappearing altogether and never One sailor who became disoriented during one of these episodes was observed to walk straight through a solid brick wall and was never seen again. During another incident, 2 sailors from the Eldridge became embroiled in a bar fight with crew members from another ship. In the midst of the brawl, with dozens of witnesses present, both men suddenly vanished into thin air, leaving their opponents swinging at empty space. There were also rumors of an even more disturbing event in which a former Eldridge crew member, experiencing one of these deep freezes, inexplicably burst into flames. His body continued to burn uncontrollably for 18 consecutive days, despite every effort by fire departments and military personnel to extinguish the blaze. The flames seemed to feed on something other than oxygen, burning with an intensity that defied explanation. Carl Allen's explanation when pressed for an explanation of these terrifying incidents by investigative reporter Jim Frazier in 1986. Carl Allen stated firmly that he didn't believe the torment experienced by the men was psychological in nature. It wasn't trauma or mental illness causing these phenomena. Instead, he believed it was a physical side effect of the powerful electromagnetic field they'd been exposed to during the experiment. According to Allen, the electromagnetic forces had somehow knocked the affected crew members temporarily out of sync with the rest of reality. They existed in a kind of limbo state, not fully anchored to our dimension. which explained their ability to phase through solid objects and their tendency to fade from existence. In most cases, Alan explained, the simple laying on of hands by a friend or family member would somehow anchor the suffering person back to reality and prevent them from disappearing completely. Human contact seemed to act as a kind of grounding force, pulling them back from whatever dimensional void they were slipping into. But for some unfortunate souls, this simple intervention didn't always prove successful. They would fade away despite the desperate efforts of their loved ones, lost forever to forces that science couldn't explain or control. Hush hush. The science behind the madness. While Alan couldn't fully explain the scientific principles behind what would become known as the Philadelphia experiment, he did provide insight into what had been intended by the researchers involved. According to his account, the scientists were experimenting with something called unified field theory. This concept, which had fascinated physicists, including Albert Einstein, centered on the idea that fundamental forces such as electromagnetism and gravity could be unified and amplified through the generation of massive amounts of electrical energy. The theory suggested that by creating powerful enough electromagnetic fields, various underlying principles and side effects of these forces would be simultaneously enhanced. One of the anticipated results was that escalations in the degree of light reflection and refraction could theoretically render objects inside the affected zone invisible to various forms of detection, including the human eye and enemy radar systems. Given Carl Allen's observations and those of other witnesses present at the time, this invisibility effect seemed to have been successfully achieved. After all, the USS Eldridge had completely disappeared from the visual plane before reappearing several minutes later. But during interviews with surviving crew members in the days and weeks following the experiment, it became clear that there may have been an even more extraordinary and unanticipated result. Hush hush. The teleportation incident. After regaining their memories following the trauma they'd endured, several crew members made claims that seemed even more impossible than the ship's invisibility. They insisted that during the time the Eldridge had vanished from Philadelphia, it had actually been teleported elsewhere entirely. During this temporary displacement, they claimed to have recognized features of the naval base at Norfolk in Virginia, located nearly 300 miles to the south. The crew members described seeing the distinctive landmarks of the Norfolk base, including specific buildings and dock configurations that they couldn't have known about unless they'd actually been there. Discreet inquiries were carried out at Norfolk, and several witnesses there reported having briefly seen the USS Eldridge at their location on the exact day in question. These independent confirmations suggested the astounding possibility that the electromagnetic forces generated to cloak the vessel had been even more powerful than anyone had anticipated. The destroyer Escort had somehow been instantaneously teleported over a distance of hundreds of miles, existing in 2 locations within the span of minutes. This meant that the experiment had supposedly succeeded in breaking not just the laws of optics and camouflage, but the fundamental laws of physics governing space and time themselves. Hush hush. The cover-up begins. In the immediate aftermath of the experiment, it became clear to military officials that they had unleashed forces far beyond their ability to control or understand. The human cost had been catastrophic. The scientific implications were staggering, and the potential for public panic was enormous. Working with ruthless efficiency, the military began an extensive cover-up operation. The surviving crew members were scattered to different assignments. Many were given medical discharges, and some were quietly committed to psychiatric facilities where their stories could be dismissed as the ravings of mentally unstable individuals. Official records were altered or destroyed entirely. The ship's logs were rewritten to show that the USS Eldridge had never even docked at Philadelphia during October 1943, instead showing her on a routine shakedown cruise in the Bahamas throughout that entire period. Similarly, the logs of the SS Andrew Furusit were modified to show the transport ship traveling between New York and Iran as part of wartime convoy operations, nowhere near Philadelphia on the date in question. The families of crew members who had died or disappeared were told their loved ones had been killed in routine naval accidents or enemy action. Death certificates were issued, memorial services were held, and the true fate of these men was buried under layers of official documentation and bureaucratic silence. The decades of silence. For over 4 decades, Carl Allen carried the burden of what he'd witnessed alone. He continued his naval career, serving on several other vessels during the remainder of World War II. But the memory of that October night never left him. He watched as the official version of events was carefully constructed and maintained, knowing that somewhere in classified files, the truth was being deliberately obscured. After the war, Allen tried to return to a normal life, but the weight of his secret began to take its toll. He became increasingly withdrawn, estranged from most of his family members who couldn't understand his strange behavior and cryptic comments about things that couldn't be talked about. Friends described him as a man haunted by something, though none suspected the true nature of his burden. As the years passed, Allen's health began to deteriorate. A series of increasingly regular hospital admissions forced him to confront the likelihood of his impending death. It was this realization that finally prompted him to break his decades-long silence. The truth emerges by 1986. Carl Allen had become Carlos Allen, a 61-year-old man living a reclusive existence in the quiet, rural farming town of Greeley, Colorado, near penniless and in failing health. He made the decision that would bring the Philadelphia experiment to public attention for the first time. He reached out to investigative reporter Jim Frazier, agreeing to meet at his modest home to tell his story. During that interview on August 14, 1986, Allen would stun the reporter with revelations that challenged everything the public thought they knew about the limits of military technology and government secrecy. Allen explained in meticulous detail how hidden elements within the U.S. military had managed to rewrite the accepted laws of physics, causing a solid steel warship to disappear completely from sight. He described the horrific human cost of the experiment and the elaborate cover-up that had followed. But perhaps most shocking of all, he revealed that the experiment would have been deemed a complete success by military standards, if not for the tragic consequences that had befallen the crew. From a purely technological standpoint, they had achieved the impossible: true invisibility and instantaneous teleportation. The skeptics and the evidence. When Allen's story first became public, it was met with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. Critics pointed out that official naval records showed no evidence of the experiment ever taking place. The USS Eldridge's service records indicated she was nowhere near Philadelphia at the time in question, and interviews with surviving veterans from various Eldridge crew reunions never uncovered anyone who claimed to have been involved in such an incident. Investigations into Allen himself revealed a man with a reputation for embellishment and fantasy. Family members and friends painted a picture of someone who had spent his entire life exaggerating his experiences and encounters. Over the course of several interviews he gave on the subject, it became clear that he had altered or embellished various aspects of his tale. When directly challenged by journalists, Allen, at one point, apparently admitted that he had made the entire story up, only to vehemently deny this claim during subsequent interviews. The contradictions and inconsistencies in his various accounts eventually forced him to retreat from public life, living in relative seclusion until his death in March 1994. The hidden truth. Despite the apparent unreliability of Carl Allen's testimony, subsequent research has revealed that official experiments using remarkably similar principles did indeed take place during World War II. Efforts to render ships invisible to magnetic triggers of enemy mines and torpedoes, known as degaussing, were undertaken by Allied navies throughout the conflict. These experiments involved running series of electrical cables and coils around the perimeter of ships to generate controlled electromagnetic fields that would confuse enemy detection systems. Examples of this technology can still be seen today aboard HMS Belfast, the World War II museum ship docked on the River Thames in central London. Official papers that have since been declassified suggest that similar and more advanced experiments were carried out by the United States Navy aboard vessels, including the USS Hammond, an Itzol-class destroyer that was indeed based in Philadelphia at the time the events related by Allen allegedly took place. There are also documented reports that sailors aboard the USS Timberman were adversely affected by experimental electrical fields during post-war degaussing trials conducted during the 1950s. These men experienced symptoms remarkably similar to those described by Allen: temporary paralysis, disorientation, and in some cases, lasting psychological trauma. New witnesses emerge over the years following Allen's initial revelations. Additional witnesses claiming to have been present at the Philadelphia naval yards during the experiment have come forward. Most notable among these was Alfred Bielik, a former sailor who claimed to have served aboard the Eldridge at the time and to have actually jumped off the ship at the moment the experiment was initiated. Bielik's testimony was even more detailed and disturbing than Allen's original account. He described experiencing the teleportation firsthand, claimed to have walked around the Norfolk Naval Base while the ship was displaced, and provided technical details about the equipment used that seemed to demonstrate genuine knowledge of advanced electromagnetic theory. His account was so haunting and seemingly credible that it cemented the Philadelphia experiment's place in popular culture as one of the most disturbing military experiments of all time. This has led to persistent suggestions that the U.S. military acted quickly to cover up the tragic events they had perpetrated. The cover-up theory. According to proponents of the Philadelphia experiment theory, the military's cover-up operation was far more extensive than simply altering records and relocating personnel. They suggest that the Navy may have gone so far as to completely replace the crew of the Eldridge before she saw real combat service, ensuring that no one with direct knowledge of the experiment would ever serve together again. The theory extends to suggest that logs of all ships that had been present during the experiment were systematically altered, creating a paper trail that made it appear the incident never occurred. Some even suggest that the military assisted in the production of a Hollywood movie based on the subject released in 1984 specifically to push the story further into the realm of science fiction and make it easier to dismiss as fantasy. This level of coordinated deception would have required resources and planning on a massive scale involving multiple branches of the military, various government agencies, and possibly even cooperation from foreign allies who might have had observers present during the experiment. Connections to other projects. The alleged events of the Philadelphia experiment bear striking similarities to rumors surrounding German experimental weapons programs during World War II, particularly the mysterious project known as Die Glock, or the Bell. This supposed Nazi superweapon was said to involve similar electromagnetic field manipulation and resulted in similar horrific effects on test subjects. These parallels have led to speculation that both the Allies and Axis powers were experimenting with forces they could unfully comprehend or control during the war. The race to develop new technologies that could provide decisive military advantages may have pushed scientists on both sides into territory where the boundaries between physics and the supernatural began to blur. The themes present in the Philadelphia experiment story also appear in another alleged secretive project undertaken by the United States military in the aftermath of World War II. This program, reportedly carried out at an air base on the eastern tip of Long Island in New York, involved experiments in psychological manipulation and reality alteration that became known as the Montauk Project. The legacy continues. Whether the Philadelphia experiment actually occurred as described by Carl Allen and other witnesses remains one of the most debated topics in conspiracy theory circles. The lack of definitive physical evidence, the contradictions in witness testimony, and the military's absolute denial of any such experiment have left the truth shrouded in mystery. But the story's enduring power lies not just in its spectacular claims about invisibility and teleportation, but in what it represents about the relationship between governments and their citizens during times of war. The idea that military researchers would sacrifice the lives and sanity of their own personnel in pursuit of technological advantages is not difficult to believe, given what we now know about other experimental programs conducted during the same era. Projects like MK-Ultra, the Tuskegee syphilis study, and various radiation experiments conducted on unwitting subjects demonstrate that the ethical boundaries we take for granted today were routinely crossed by researchers working under the banner of national security. The human cost. Regardless of whether the specific details of the Philadelphia experiment are true, the story serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of military ambition and scientific hubris. The image of sailors fused with steel bulkheads, men turned inside out by forces beyond comprehension, and crew members fading from existence while their families never learned the truth, resonates as a cautionary tale about the price of progress. Carl Allen, whether he was a truthful witness or a skilled fantasyist, spent the last decades of his life as a broken man, haunted by visions of horror that few could understand or believe. His story, true or false, speaks to the lasting trauma experienced by those who serve their countries in conflicts where the rules of engagement extend far beyond conventional warfare. The unanswered questions. Even today, nearly 8 decades after the alleged experiment took place, fundamental questions remain unanswered. If the Philadelphia experiment never occurred, how do we explain the documented side effects experienced by sailors on other vessels during similar electromagnetic experiments? Why do official records show evidence of advanced degaussing research at exactly the locations and times described by witnesses? And perhaps most troubling of all, if military researchers were capable of such experiments in 1943, what advances in reality, manipulation, and dimensional technology might they have achieved in the decades since? The Philadelphia experiment may be just the tip of an iceberg of secret research that continues to this day. The story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of reality itself. If solid matter can be made to phase through other solid matter, if human beings can be temporarily displaced from our dimension, if the fundamental laws of physics can be suspended through electromagnetic manipulation, then what does that mean for our understanding of existence itself? Conclusion. The truth we may never know. The Philadelphia experiment represents one of the most compelling and disturbing military conspiracy theories of the modern era. Whether it occurred exactly as described by Carl Allen and other witnesses, was based on actual but less dramatic experiments, or was entirely fictional, it has become a cultural touchstone for questions about government secrecy, military ethics, and the limits of scientific knowledge. What we can say with certainty is that electromagnetic research conducted during World War II and the decades following did result in documented cases of personnel being adversely affected by experimental procedure. We know that military researchers were willing to sacrifice the well-being of their own people in pursuit of technological advantages, and we know that extensive efforts were made to conceal the true nature of these experiments from public scrutiny. The image of the USS Eldridge disappearing into that green haze, the horrific fate of her crew, and the decades-long cover-up that followed have become legend. But like all the best legends, this one contains elements that feel disturbingly close to documented historical fact. Carl Allen took his secrets to the grave in 1994, but his story continues to inspire researchers, conspiracy theorists, and anyone who believes that the official version of history often conceals truths too shocking for public consumption. The Philadelphia experiment serves as a reminder that in times of war and crises, the boundaries between science and madness, between progress and horror, can become dangerously thin. And somewhere in classified files that may never see the light of day, the complete truth about what happened in Philadelphia Harbor on that October night in 1943 continues to wait. Whether that truth would vindicate Carl Allen's incredible claims or expose them as elaborate fiction, we may never know. But the questions raised by his testimony remain as relevant today as they were when he first broke his silence. In an age where technology advances at an unprecedented pace, where military research pushes ever further into uncharted territory, and where governments continue to classify their most sensitive operations, the Philadelphia experiment stands as both a warning and a challenge. How far are we willing to go in the name of progress? What prices are we prepared to pay for technological superiority? And what happens when we unlock forces that prove to be beyond our ability to control? These are the questions that the Philadelphia experiment forces us to confront, regardless of whether we believe Carl Allen's extraordinary tale. And they are questions that may become increasingly urgent as we venture further into realms where science and the supernatural intersect, where the impossible becomes possible and where the cost of knowledge may prove to be higher than we ever imagined. The truth about the Philadelphia experiment may be lost to history, but its lessons about power, secrecy, and the human cost of ambition remain as relevant today as ever. In a world where reality itself seems increasingly malleable, where the boundaries between fact and fiction continue to blur, the story of the USS Eldridge serves as both a fascinating mystery and a sobering reminder of what we might lose in our relentless pursuit of what we hope to gain. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your night. May you find deep peace and restful sleep. Wishing you the sweetest dreams. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.